Many books have explored the life of Celia Thaxter, one of the most popular poets of her day. Mine casts a wider net by focusing on the details of how people lived before technology altered ancient ways. Her Victorian world was very different from our own. Accounts of Celia's life usually leave out the things I find most interesting: what people wore, what they ate, the way they spoke, how they raised their children, how they made a living, the pastimes they enjoyed, what they thought about themselves and their place in society, and why they treated each other the way they did. I particularly love to trace the origins of customs, beliefs, and inventions. Celia's works, including more than 300 poems, were read widely, and she knew many other famous artists. She was a skilled painter. She was a spiritual seeker, exploring ideas beyond conventional Christianity. She campaigned against the slaughter of birds to adorn women's hats. She poured herself into growing a garden on a wind-swept island, and she cared deeply for her neighbors on the Isles of Shoals. In the Victorian era, the Industrial Revolution was just getting started. For women especially, each day was filled with tasks that had to be done by hand. The simple act of turning a handle to get water from a faucet lay far in the future. There was no plumbing, electricity, refrigeration, or central heating. Stoves had no temperature settings. Cooks determined how hot an oven was by how long they could hold their hand in it. People grew much of their own food, hunted regularly, and often killed their livestock themselves. They ate things we no longer consider appetizing or even recognize. And there was very little in the way of effective or safe medicine, which meant that illness much more frequently led to death. Celia came to the Isles of Shoals at age 4 and spent her early years on White Island, where her father was the lighthouse keeper. In her teens, her father built Appledore House, a grand hotel that promised healthy air to counteract the bad effects of city life. I explore what it was like to stay on Appledore, and we meet all the people who worked there, the women and men who kept the place running so hundreds of guests could enjoy themselves. The amount of work was enormous. The staff fed some 400 people 3 meals a day. Maids cleaned rooms and emptied hundreds of chamber pots into the sea. The Laytons employed several fishing families, and Star Island, just across the harbor, was home to many more. Celia married very young and rapidly had 3 sons. They fought constantly, and along with domestic squabbles, she was saddled with most of the drudgery required to run a household. Her husband resisted hiring servants to help her, even after she became the sole breadwinner. The roles of husband and wife were very firm, and she had little say in the circumstances of her life. When Celia was on Appledore, she stayed in a cottage near the hotel, often with her son Carl, who had physical and mental troubles. There was talk of sending him to an institution, of hiding him away to preserve the family's reputation, because in her time disabilities were a source of shame. Celia never abandoned Carl and found safe places for them both. All her life, Celia was surrounded by servants, but most accounts of her life barely mention them. She also constantly interacted with her neighbors, many of them recent immigrants. I will pay attention to all the people around her. The best way to learn about these people is through census records and directories, where we see their names and ages, places of origin, level of education. They're often surprising stories add a rich layer to the history of the Isles of Shoals. Celia was not personally involved in keeping people in bondage, and many of her friends were deeply committed to the struggle to abolish slavery. But her world was bounded by a strict social hierarchy, in which men controlled most aspects of the lives of women, and the well-off ruled the lives of everyone else. Like many people of her time, Celia wrote letters constantly, using a pen dipped into an inkwell. These letters tell us much about her. By focusing on her own words and those of people who actually knew her, I refute a few myths about her that took on a life of their own. In her later life, Celia became a skilled painter, mostly working on china. She grew an amazing garden on Appledore, coaxing blooms from the rocky, windswept earth. My research reveals what happened to the people in Celia's life in the years following her death at just 59 in 1899. Nobody ever says what became of Carl or the many people who worked at the Appledore and Oceanic hotels, but I have dug into records of all kinds to discover their circumstances. I hope you will enjoy exploring Celia's fascinating Victorian life and the echoes from her time that still reverberate on Star Island and in the wider world.